The first time someone heard it again was on a Tuesday. It was just past midnight, and the long stone corridor of the old music conservatory was silent, save for the gentle creak of pipes and the occasional sigh of the building settling in its age. Room 313 stood at the far end of the third floor, its wooden door sealed with rusted nails and a warning sign that had long since faded. But that night, a sound drifted out, so soft and deliberate, it could have been mistaken for a dream. A single note, a G sharp, hanging in the air like breath, then another, and another. Someone was playing the piano inside room 313. A night custodian passing by paused, frowning. He turned toward the sound, heart pounding, the keys echoing deep inside his rib cage. He stepped forward, hand reaching for the knob before catching himself. The door wouldn't budge. No light bled from underneath. But the music continued, mournful, elegant, a requiem of broken wrists and bitten lips. It played for exactly 7 minutes, then it stopped. Silence again. The custodian never told anyone what he heard. Room 313 had been sealed since the accident, and the piano inside was never meant to be played again. The autumn wind bit against Ilara's neck as she climbed the steps of the Albrecht Conservatory of Music, her fingers numb around the strap of her suitcase. The building loomed before her like a cathedral of forgotten sounds, its towers weathered, its windows dark and narrow like watching eyes. She stood at the entrance, boots clicking against the cold stone, and allowed herself a moment to breathe it all in. She had made it. The scholarship had arrived like a miracle, unexpected, almost suspicious. A full ride, room and board, unlimited practice access, no audition required. She didn't care why. She had grown up with broken keyboards and secondhand sheet music. Her mother worked night shifts in a textile factory, and Ilara had taught herself to play by mimicking YouTube videos and memorizing muscle memory like prayer. Talent, they called it, but she knew better. It was survival. It was hunger. She pulled open the heavy doors, stepping into the main hall. Marble columns rose toward vaulted ceilings, chandeliers casting golden shadows over the polished floor. A receptionist behind a desk greeted her without looking up. Name? Ilara Mire. The woman glanced at her screen, frowned slightly. Ah, you're the room 317 placement, East Wing. She handed her a brass key and a folded map of the campus. You'll be assigned an instructor after orientation. Until then, you may use the public practice rooms on floors 1 and 2. The third floor is faculty only. Do not attempt to access it. Ilara raised an eyebrow. Why? The receptionist finally looked at her. Her eyes were pale and tired. Tradition. Her dorm room was small but private, an unexpected luxury. She unpacked slowly, setting her worn metronome on the desk like a familiar friend. From the window, she could see the garden courtyard, still green despite the encroaching cold. That night, she explored the halls. Her fingers itched for a piano, and the public rooms were still open. She found one on the first floor, old, slightly out of tune, but serviceable. As she sat and pressed the keys, a sense of relief washed over her, but something felt lacking. The keys resisted her touch. The sound was hollow. Her hands moved out of habit, but the music didn't rise from within her the way it used to. Something was missing, and she couldn't explain it. That's when she heard it, a sound, far away, nearly imperceptible. Faint piano notes coming from above. She stopped playing. The melody was strange. Not a student practicing scales, not a professor testing chords. It was intimate, like a confession whispered in music. Slow, grieving, beautiful in a way that made her skin crawl. It was coming from the third floor. She followed the sound like a thread, up the stairs, past empty classrooms. The notes grew clearer with each step. When she reached the third floor, the air felt colder. The corridor was darker, even though the lights above still flickered weakly. Her footsteps slowed. At the far end of the hall, she saw it. Room 313. The door was shut, but something pulsed behind it, like a heartbeat made of melody. She approached, hand trembling. The brass plate on the door was tarnished, the number barely legible. A thick layer of dust clung to the doorknob. She touched it. Ice. Just as she leaned in, the music stopped. Dead silence. Alara took a step back, suddenly aware of how alone she was. Her heart pounded as she turned and hurried down the corridor. Behind her, the door creaked slightly. The next morning, she asked a student about room 313. He laughed uncomfortably. "You heard about that?" "Number I heard it. Last night." He lowered his voice. "Don't go poking around up there. That room's cursed." She waited. He leaned closer. "They say a student died in there, years ago. Some prodigy went mad, played until her hands bled, then just vanished." Alara blinked. "Vanished?" "Some say suicide. Some say the faculty covered it up, but no one goes in there now. They sealed the room." He paused. "Except..." She leaned in. "Except what?" He shrugged. "Some people say the piano still plays itself after midnight." That night, Alara didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart aching with questions she couldn't name. Around 2 a.m., she got up, pulled on a coat, and stepped barefoot into the corridor. She climbed the stairs again, quietly this time. No one around. When she reached the third floor, the hallway greeted her like an old friend. Still dark, still silent. But the door to room 313 was slightly ajar, just an inch, as if it had been waiting. She hesitated, then stepped forward, breath held. Inside, the room was covered in shadows. Dust motes danced in moonlight filtering through a high window. And there it stood, the piano, grand, black, a concert model, its lid slightly lifted, the keys white as bone. It gleamed like it had just been polished. Alara stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft click. She sat at the bench, heart pounding. One note, she told herself, just one. She pressed a key. The sound that emerged was not music, it was memory. She saw flashes, a girl with bandaged fingers, a professor looming behind her, tears falling on ivory, and then fire, screams, silence. Alara's hands flew from the keys, but the piano kept playing. Alara stumbled back from the bench, her pulse roaring in her ears. The keys of the grand piano still vibrated faintly, as if someone or something was still pressing down on them, long after her hands had withdrawn. She blinked. The room had gone utterly still. The silence felt heavier than before. She turned toward the door, hand on the knob, ready to flee. But then, a thought stopped her. What did I just feel? The sound, the vision, whatever it was, it had moved her in a way nothing else ever had. She had played thousands of hours before, but not like this. That one note, just one, had made her heart race, her vision blur. It was as though the piano had poured someone else's soul into her veins. She looked back at the instrument. It waited. Its lid was half open like a gaping mouth, its ivory keys glinting under moonlight like teeth. She sat again, slowly. This time she played a full chord. The same surge rushed through her spine, but stronger, like a scream trapped beneath her skin. Her fingers began to move on their own, guided by an instinct that wasn't entirely her own. It was as if someone else's grief was flowing through her hands. She wasn't just playing the piano, she was channeling it. Her body trembled, her head light with sound, until the final note hovered in the air like a breath unwilling to die. And then silence. She sat there for a long time, eyes closed, hands on her lap. When she finally stood up, her legs were shaking. She exited room 313 without a word, closing the door behind her. The hallway had grown colder, and when she reached her room, dawn was already bleeding into the sky. She collapsed into bed, fully clothed, and dreamed of music composed from weeping. Over the following days, Alara's obsession grew. By day, she sat through orientation, met professors, exchanged forced greetings with other scholarship students who eyed her with wary curiosity. Her designated instructor, a stern woman named Professor Lentz, offered only curt nods when Alara played during formal assessments. Technical, but lacking presence, Lentz said, scribbling notes. We'll need to draw more out of you. Alara bit back her frustration. If only they had heard her play that piano. At night, when the halls emptied, she returned to room 313. She never saw another soul on the third floor, not even a janitor. The door was always slightly ajar, as though it remembered her, welcomed her. Each time she played, the experience grew more intense. She began to feel things, memories that weren't hers. The pain of calluses splitting open, the shame of being watched too closely, the breathless panic of playing a note wrong and feeling someone's anger looming behind you. She started keeping gloves in her pocket. Her fingers were growing raw, but her skill, her technical ability, was transforming. In lessons, her professors took notice. Even Lentz seemed surprised. "You've improved," she said, blinking, "considerably." Alara simply nodded. She didn't say where she'd been practicing. By the third week, Alara had stopped using the first floor practice rooms altogether. She avoided the student lounge, skipped meals, let calls from her mother go unanswered. Her music became everything, but not hers alone, because she began to sense the presence. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air, a flicker in the mirror that hung on the far wall of room 313. Then it became clearer. Some nights as she played, she would glance to the side and see her reflection, but the girl staring back at her had different eyes. One night, after finishing a mournful nocturne she had never learned but somehow knew by heart, she turned to the mirror fully and saw her. A girl, young, pale, hair tied back with a crimson ribbon. She stood behind Alara in the reflection, fingers hovering over the piano keys, her lips moving but no sound escaping. Alara gasped and turned around. No one. But when she looked back at the mirror, the girl was still there, watching and smiling. Alara found the name Clara Weiss in a dusty register in the conservatory library, buried under 2 decades of archived files. There was only a brief mention, Clara Weiss, full scholarship recipient, deceased 2003. Cause of death unknown. Former pupil of Maestro Brandt. No obituary, no graduation record, just a name, a date, and a silence that screamed. She typed it into online search engines, but the results were thin. Old recital programs, a single blurry photograph from a master class. Clara had been a rising star, a genius, then gone, like she never existed. Lara began dreaming of her. Clara had arrived at the conservatory at the age of 14. Her fingers raw from practicing on a chipped upright piano in her foster home, but her eyes filled with light. She was a prodigy in the purest sense. When she played, the room stilled, and Maestro Brandt saw it the moment he heard her touch a single note. She was perfect clay. At first, he praised her, gently corrected her, gave her sonatas tailored to her skill. But soon, praise turned to critique, then to correction, then to control. Number again. Do not breathe like that. You are not playing. You are failing. Each mistake, no matter how small, meant hours more practice. No sleep until her fingers bled. He made her repeat one bar over and over until her hands cramped into claws. When she cried, he turned up the metronome and whispered, "Music demands sacrifice. If you can't give that, you don't deserve to be called a pianist." But it wasn't only the physical torment. Maestro Brandt isolated her. He forbid her from making friends, insisting that true artists live in solitude. Her letters home were read, edited, or destroyed. When she grew thin from stress and exhaustion, he scolded her, not with concern, but with disgust. "You are weak. Weak girls don't survive in this world." She was forced to perform even with fever, and once he locked her in room 313 for 72 hours with no light, no food, just the piano and a sheet of music she was ordered to master or else. Room 313 became her cell, the piano, her captor. As the months passed, Clara began to fracture. The girl who once smiled after playing Chopin now stared blankly at the keys, afraid to miss a note. Her fingers trembled with each touch. She stopped speaking. Even when students passed her in the hall, she didn't seem to see them, and Brent was pleased. "Now," he said, smiling for the first time in months, "you are finally ready to begin." Then came the sonata, the one he wrote for her, a piece that was not meant to be beautiful but punishing. A sonata in 5 movements that twisted time, rhythm, and harmony into something unrecognizable. It was impossible by design, meant to break her over and over until she either played it flawlessly or died trying. He called it Sonata for the Forgotten, and he made her play it every midnight in room 313, alone. No one was allowed to hear it. He said it was hers alone, a gift. But it wasn't. It was a weapon. Clara's body gave in before her will. Her fingernails cracked, her joints swelled. She began coughing blood after each performance. But he kept making her play. One night she collapsed during the 3rd movement. Brandt stood over her and whispered, "You will never leave this place. The world will forget you, but this sonata, this will be your legacy." And that final night, Clara sat in room 313 in complete silence. Her hands rested on the keys, but she did not play. The sonata no longer needed rehearsal. It was etched into her bones. She lit a single candle beside the piano. Then, with trembling fingers, She tied the frayed strings of her broken violin, not to play but to bind her wrists. With a shard of shattered glass from the cracked rehearsal mirror, she carved the first measure of the sonata onto her forearm, deep and deliberate. And as blood began to stain the ivory keys, she whispered, "You wanted a perfect ending, maestro, so listen well." She struck the first note, then the next, and with every chord she bled. By the time the final note rang out, her body was slumped over the piano, her face pressed into the keys, a twisted lullaby of genius and agony forever sealed in crimson and silence. Alara woke drenched in sweat, the sound of piano still echoing in her ears. The next morning she asked Professor Lentz about Maestro Brandt. Lentz's eyes hardened. "That man was a legend," she said tightly. "Brilliant, ruthless, died just before your time. Why do you ask?" "I found one of his scores," Alara lied. "Haunting." Lentz didn't respond for a moment. Then, he had favorites. One in particular, the girl who played in room 313. "Alara?" Lentz lowered her voice. "Don't go digging into ghosts. They don't like being remembered." But Alara couldn't stop. Room 313 had become her sanctuary and her cage. The more she played, the more Clara's voice seemed to grow stronger inside her mind. "She was us," Clara said one night, her voice now fully audible in the room. "Poor, quiet, desperate to matter." "You don't have to be like them," Clara hissed. "You don't have to be hollow. Make them hear you." Alara nodded. She knew what she had to do next. She would prepare for a performance. Not just any performance, a private recital. In the dead of night, in room 313, where her fingers would speak for those who had been silenced. Alara stood in the dim hallway, hand resting on the handle of room 313. The brass knob felt cold, even colder than usual, as though the door itself was aware of her intent. She had brought candles this time, not just her usual flashlight. 6 slender ivory tapers, the kind used in old concerts. She set them around the room, placing one on each windowsill, 2 atop the piano, and 2 near the corners. The electric lights above had long stopped working, and moonlight alone would not do justice to the music she planned to play. Tonight wasn't just practice, it was a performance. No audience, no judges, no professors, just her and Clara. She had prepared a selection, a fractured nocturne by Chopin, a piece Clara had once performed according to an old recital flyer, then one of her own compositions, a feverish blend of minor chords and heartache, something she had written after her first real encounter with Clara's reflection. She wasn't afraid anymore. If anything, she felt indebted. The room was still, its shadows long and silent. She sat, spine straight, hands poised above the keys. Her breath came slow, deliberate. The candles flickered, casting golden ghosts across the cracked walls. She began to play. The notes started soft, lush, broken. They clung to the air like perfume. Long after her fingers left each key, the sound lingered. She could feel Clara now, behind her, not watching, not whispering, but being. Their presence had merged. The second piece flowed from her fingers like it had always lived inside her, a dark, aching lament. It wasn't perfect. The tempo stumbled. A few notes trembled beneath her fingers. But it was raw and true. When she struck the final chord, the air itself seemed to shudder. Then, silence. She sat frozen, Then Clara whispered, "You are ready." The mirror on the wall no longer showed Alara. It showed Clara fully now as she once was. But her hands were bloody. Red seeped through invisible wounds across her palms, trailing down her wrists. Her ribbon had fallen loose, hair a black mess around her sunken eyes. "You know what they did," Clara said. "You felt it in the music." Alara stared, throat dry. "Who?" Clara stepped forward in the reflection. "Brant," she hissed. "He made me play until I bled, until I couldn't see the keys through tears, then punished me for crying." Alara remembered the pain in her own hands, the dreams of bleeding. "And when I was no longer perfect," Clara whispered, "he discarded me." Suddenly, Alara was inside Clara's memory. Clara stood in the same room 2 decades earlier. The piano looked newer, polished. The air held the scent of wax and ink. At the bench sat Clara, alive. Behind her loomed a tall man with sunken cheeks and sharp eyes, Maestro Brant. "Again," he said coldly. Clara's fingers were shaking. My hands." He slammed the metronome on the lid. "Play." Clara obeyed. The keys bled red beneath her touch. Alara gasped and fell back, tearing herself from the piano. She was back in the present, but she was not alone. The air crackled. A low hum reverberated from the strings inside the piano. The candles sputtered and the mirror glowed with an unnatural light. Clara stepped from the glass. Not physically, not quite. But her will, her anguish entered the room like a second storm. "I died in this room," Clara said, "but not by his hand." She touched the piano. "I played until I couldn't anymore. And when he refused to let me leave, when he called me useless, I made a choice." Alara's breath caught. Clara's voice was not angry. It was broken. "I poured everything into one final piece, a confession, a scream. The piano drank it, and now so do you." Alara fell to her knees. The music was inside her head, Clara's last piece, her death song. It clawed through her thoughts like a caged beast. She heard crying, screams, silence, then only one word. "Finish it." The next morning, Alara skipped class. She walked the edge of campus like a ghost herself, numb to everything except one truth. She couldn't ignore Clara anymore. She couldn't just play with the piano. She had to finish what Clara started. Back in her dorm, she pulled out manuscripts, sketching out the notes as they came. It wasn't easy. The melody warped, bent like a branch in a storm. Some nights the music made her weep, other nights it made her bleed. Her fingers cracked open. She began wearing bandages, then gloves. Her roommate moved out. Alara hardly noticed. She was composing something alive, something terrible and divine. One evening, she visited Professor Lentz. "I want to perform," she said. Lentz looked up. "For what?" "A private recital, end of term." Lentz narrowed her eyes. "There are rules." "I'll host it in the old hall," Alara interrupted. "After hours, no school resources, just my piano." "What piece?" Alara slid the score across the table. Lentz read the title aloud, Sonata for the Forgotten. The professor's hands trembled slightly as she touched the page. Her face paled. Where did you get this?" "I wrote it." Lentz didn't speak for a long time. Then she said softly, "That name, Clara Weiss. It's not just an old student. She was my friend. The old concert hall was no longer in use, forgotten like the girl whose spirit had haunted it for decades. It had once been a centerpiece of the conservatory, built with arched ceilings and velvet curtains that had long since faded to the color of dried blood. Ilara unlocked the side door at midnight. She wheeled the piano from room 313 herself. It was impossibly heavy, more than it should have been, as if it resisted movement, bound to the room that had become Clara's tomb. But Ilara had waited long enough. It scraped along the hallways like a coffin being dragged through marble corridors. By 1 a.m., the piano sat center stage. By 1:30, the candles were lit. At 2 a.m., she began to play. There was no audience, no cameras, no professors, only the ghosts. Clara sat beside her now, not as a reflection, not as a whisper, but as a phantom in the flesh, pale and glowing with sorrow and rage. Her hands hovered just above Ilara's, guiding her, reminding her. The sonata for the forgotten began as a lullaby, a single note held like a breath before a scream. Then a trembling harmony, like a sob held behind clenched teeth. The melody wound upward, fragile and slow, before breaking into furious, jagged arpeggios, Clara's memories given sound. Behind her eyes, Ilara saw it all. The punishment for imperfect notes, the locked doors, the bruises hidden beneath sleeves, the final confrontation when Clara begged for rest and was denied. The music climbed, it clawed, it bled. Ilara's fingers flew, barely keeping pace. Blood from her cracked skin dotted the ivory keys, turning the instrument into a relic of suffering. The candles swayed with every crescendo, their flames bending toward the center of the stage. And then, the room shook. The air grew thick and electric. The walls of the old concert hall moaned, as if the building itself remembered Clara's torment. And in that moment, the final movement began. A passage written not by Ilara, not even by Clara, but by something else. Something deeper, something ancient and vengeful that had slept inside the piano since the day Clara died. It surged into Ilara's hands. She didn't resist. She couldn't. From the shadows, they came. Figures, dozens of them. Students, teachers, performers, all forgotten, discarded, broken by the same system that had consumed Clara. Some wept, others stood in silence, all of them drawn by the sound. Their pain became the music. Each note struck a wound in the world. Professor Lentz arrived just as the final page turned. She stood frozen at the back of the hall, tears in her eyes. "Ilara," she whispered, "what have you done?" But Ilara didn't answer. She played on. She was no longer just herself. She was Clara, she was the music, she was every student who had ever bled into their art, only to be forgotten. And when the final chord was struck, a thunderous, echoing E minor that split the silence in two, the piano exploded into fire. Lentz screamed as the stage lit up in blue flame, not burning but consuming. Ilara remained seated as the keys melted beneath her hands. Clara stood behind her, smiling for the first time, at peace. And then both of them vanished in the light. In the aftermath, the hall remained untouched. No sign of fire, no blood on the keys. The piano was back in room 313, pristine and silent. Ilara was never seen again. Neither was Clara. but students spoke of music drifting down from the third floor at night. Music that made them weep. Music that made them remember. And those brave enough to enter room 313 said the piano would play with them, or through them, only if they had suffered, only if they truly understood what it meant to be forgotten. Years later, a new scholarship student arrived, quiet, hungry, desperate. She found herself drawn to the locked room on the third floor. Inside, a piano waited. Its lid was open. The candles were ready, and a ribbon, crimson, faded, rested on the bench, waiting.